And a good Wednesday to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. Couple things to talk about as we head into the first day of a new month. We are going to wrap up a lot of data that we did see as of the month of March in terms of your temperatures, in terms of your rainfall, and we'll look ahead at what's going to change over the course of April 1st all the way into April 30th as we move into this first officially full month of the spring season. But first things first, we did wrap up the month of March with some rainfall, and it was once again mainly present over in west central Georgia, like we were thinking, mainly west of I-75. But take a look at what we manifested yesterday. We were talking about, could we get some rainfall, maybe one of those showers or even a low-end thunderstorm to go over southern Bibb County to maybe record some rainfall at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. We did exactly just that. So maybe I'm just going to have to talk like that for the foreseeable future. So hopefully we can continue to add some numbers up. But only about a ½ inch of rain did fall at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. I did see some folks posting in the Weather Network about that shower actually that moved across 247. People saw it driving northbound from the base all the way up into southern Bibb County. But hey, every little bit is going to be what it takes. That adding up over an extended period of time as we finally, hopefully, get out of these drought conditions over the next couple of months. We did have one isolated spot of some very impressive rainfall totals. In fact, close to 2 inches of rainfall in between Butler and Reynolds over in Taylor County. And of course, as you go farther over to the east to Reynolds, farther over to the west to Butler, that's where your totals aren't quite as high as this 1.8 that we do have right in the middle of that green. More so closer to around an inch of rainfall, or maybe even getting into around the territory that we saw at Middle Georgia Regional Airport, simply only a ½ inch of rainfall. But that was a very isolated pocket of seeing some very impressive rainfall totals. Obviously, most of central Georgia barely even recording a trace, maybe only a couple tenths of an inch of rain. But officially at Middle Georgia Regional Airport, the last day of the month of March, we got about 4/10 of an inch of rainfall, 0.39 to be exact. So the total for the month of March, just above 2 inches, 2.04 inches of rainfall. And somehow, actually, your average for the month of March, at the beginning I looked at it, and it was 4.73 inches, and it went up to 4.75 inches, even though we were well below average by about 2, almost even 3 inches of rainfall that we did see in the month. And obviously, it was mainly highlighted by this very dry stretch of 2 weeks here in the back half of the month. We did have a very wet stretch, and that started around March 8th and went all the way over into the 16th, a period of about 7 to 8 days, where only 3 of those days we actually didn't record some rainfall. But of course, that also brought our fair share of severe weather into central Georgia, with the highest rainfall total at Middle Georgia Regional Airport being on March 12th, that day that we saw 9 confirmed tornadoes courtesy of that storm system. So we can take a look at your 2026 rainfall as a whole. And even though we did get a little bit of rain yesterday, March still takes the cake for the driest month that we've seen so far out of a sample size of only 3 months throughout the calendar year. But it did knock our year departure back below, or I guess above, the 5-inch mark, however you want to look at it, because this number is going to be down in the negative direction. But we're not quite back to 5 inches below average like we were sitting at as of yesterday. So some slight improvement. And it is worth noting that some of these numbers are a little bit different than what we saw on the last graphic. The last graphic for your average rainfall for each month, I take all of the data since we started taking records back in the late 1800s. Your year departure of rainfall is only based on your 30-year normal. So this is going to be based from 1991 all the way into the early 2020s. So obviously that doesn't have the sample size of every year on record. It's more of a recent trend with your year departure of rainfall. So that's why if you are adding these numbers up at home, there is going to be a little bit of a difference compared to what you saw on that last graphic and what we do see for that negative box in the month of March. But all of this data is still taken as of yesterday, and all of this data still continues to say the same thing. We need more rain. It has been very dry here in central Georgia, and the latest drought monitor last week did say the very same thing, but we'll talk more about that drought monitor as we go into tomorrow morning when we actually get a new update to it, and very likely are going to look at some of those drought conditions worsen, unfortunately. So varying rain chances each day. We'll break down which areas or which days are going to have the best rain chance each and every day as we close out the work week and head into your Easter weekend. Staying in the 80s until we finally get into the beginning of next week, maybe even as soon as Easter Sunday, we could finally have some temperatures that are going to be below 80 degrees for highs. But a soggy Easter Sunday, that is the big question, and that is probably the main headline. Going to go ahead and look ahead to your weekend forecast. But also we do have some talking points around Good Friday plans, if you have any of those plans during the evening on Friday, because rain chances are looking the most impressive for Friday as opposed to any day that we've seen throughout the work week. Here's a walk around the quad where we do have a mostly sunny environment here in central Georgia. We do see some upper level clouds up here in Macon, and then maybe down in Perry. We can also get a glimpse of some of that white higher in the sky. Down in Warner Robins, also a glimpse of them, and a few patches of some white in downtown Dublin. But overall, you're seeing the shadows all across all 4 of our sky cams, indicating a very sunny environment. And it looks like the breeze has picked up just a touch. I would love for this camera to unfreeze so I could actually show you which direction those flags are blowing in. But it does look like this flag right here, the Georgia National Fairgrounds flag, is blowing from left to right. Once again, indicating a southerly component to your winds, which is continuing to usher in more and more moisture into our forecasts. So we're more similar to most of the temperatures we do see all across the United States as of right now. Finally, in the mid-70s, like our neighbors over in Jackson, Mississippi, a little bit warmer than Charlotte and Charleston over to our east. Some upper 70s as you go along the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, Florida, even over down in Orlando, which we will talk about a little bit more in some detail towards the end of this stream, with, of course, the Artemis II being launched later on this evening. 78 also up in Washington, D.C. already, where those cherry blossoms have been in full force over the past week. But it does look like our fair share of areas, in fact, I think 5, if I'm counting correctly, take the title for the warmest temperature here at 11 a.m. on this Wednesday, this April 1st, and that's going to be Laredo, New Orleans, Panama City, Orlando, and all the way up in Washington. You can find a pretty fine dividing line of some cooler temperatures up in the Midwest, getting into the Great Lakes region of the country, and this is going to indicate a frontal boundary that is going to have implications in areas like Illinois, Indiana, maybe even getting into the Washington, D.C. area later today. Areas to the north of us do have a severe weather risk, but we're not looking at any sort of that here in central Georgia. But not to say that we couldn't hear our fair share of a rumble of thunder or two, but that's not going to be from that weather system way up to the north. It is just going to be because of our summer-like forecast that we continue to have in the forecast. So here's a look at your current temperatures. Mid-70s across most of the state of Georgia, 68 in Rome, 72 in Columbus, a little bit cooler than these mid and upper 70s that you do see maybe across the rest of the state. 74 in Columbia, down in Jacksonville, 77, the warmest number. And looking at central Georgia specifically, we actually have some 77s already. 77 in Wrightsville, 77 in Swainsboro, a good mix of the low and the mid 70s all across your temperature map. But it does look like 75 and 76. Some pretty popular numbers here at the 11 a.m. hour. Already a very pleasant feeling in a very warm early afternoon time frame, and we are going to continue to watch those numbers climb as we go into the afternoon. But really only the next couple of hours. I do anticipate our fair share of some cloud cover and our fair share of some rain chances that will maybe halt that warm up a little bit before that window, where on a clear sunny day we would typically hit our high temperature. Here's a look at your winds and your wind gusts. Not really much in the way of a widespread breeze, some occasional gust, or I guess rather sustained wind speeds around 3 miles per hour, 5, 7 miles per hour. A very light breeze is in place, but the direction is once again the most important part about this graphic, as it will continue to push areas of light green and maybe some splotchy areas of that dark green shade, indicating some noticeable and some sufficient humidity to continue to sprout those pop-up rain chances. Again, when the sun is peaking out, it is continuing to warm the surface. And when you're warming the surface, you're creating a lifting mechanism, and that is lifting all this moisture that we do have in the lower levels of the atmosphere and down at the surface, which in turn forms clouds once that moisture lifts higher and higher up into the sky. So here's a look at your satellite imagery. Not really seeing that process in full force just yet. We're just more so spotting some upper level cloud cover that's present over to the north and the northwest, more so present in the Macon area than anywhere here in central Georgia that we got a glimpse of on the sky cams, but also present up in Monroe County, Jones County, all the way into Jasper County. But the radar imagery is not picking up on anything in the way of rain here as we approach the midday hour. Also not seeing really much in the way of rain to the northwest of us. There are some showers up here just to the east of Nashville, southeast of Nashville. And then we do have what looks to be a sea breeze actually kind of forming some organized lines of showers over there in the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, getting over into southern and southwestern Alabama. So that's a pretty cool sight to see. But we will talk more about our forecast down here in the southeast United States obviously in more detail with your forecast here in central Georgia coming up, but also down over on the Atlantic and the Space Coast of Florida to talk about that Artemis launch as well. 83 degrees for a high temperature yesterday, made the climb back into the 80s and nearly 10 degrees above average. 58 for a morning low, so 10 degrees above average for your morning low temperature. So both those numbers are getting back into kind of the regular scheduled programming. What we have seen as of recently, we have become pretty accustomed to these low, maybe even some mid, and even some upper 80s in the forecast, but not quite too close to that record of 88 set back in 1954. Obviously nowhere close to the record low temperature of 28 degrees. But the big note is we did record some rainfall, and that put the year departure back below the 5-inch mark, but obviously above the 5-inch mark if you are kind of focusing on the fact that this is a negative number in certain accurate mathematical terms, but negative 4.82 inches. This is still not what you want to see in terms of your rainfall for the calendar year. Hopefully we have a lot more substantial rainmakers that will continue to put a pretty substantial dent and put that number a lot closer back to the 0-inch mark, where we can eventually put a positive in front of it. It would be a very nice change to actually see a positive in front of that number, given that it has been a couple of months consecutively with the negative in front. So here's a look at your sunrise, 7:24, and sunset yesterday at 7:54. That marks 12 hours and 30 minutes of some daylight that we did receive as of yesterday. So we are continuing to watch that window of daylight each and every day increase a couple of minutes each and every day. But like I mentioned, we wrapped up the month of March, and we already talked about your rainfall at the beginning of this stream. Let's talk about your temperatures, and it was no secret March was a very warm month here in central Georgia. Your totals now, 8 days that were below average. We had 2 days that were exactly at average of 70 degrees on March 13th, and then 73 degrees this past Saturday, the 28th, for that second to last day of Cherry Blossom Festival. So we did have a couple of blue boxes courtesy of some frontal boundaries that were a bit stronger than others that moved through, specifically the one right here around St. Patrick's Day, right before St. Patrick's Day. That actually resulted in the coolest numbers that we did see all month, with 2 days that topped out in the low and the upper 50s on St. Patrick's Day and the day after. But above average dominated this calendar graphic. 21 days throughout the month of March, which is good enough for roughly about 2/3 of the month that we were above average, and a good mix of the 70s and the 80s for those high temperatures, with the warmest high temperature being last Monday afternoon of 88 degrees. So let's talk about April. What can we expect as we head into this new month? The warmest temperature we've ever recorded in the month of April, 96 degrees. That was back in 1986. The coldest ever came back in 2007, so roughly about 20 years ago, that we had a morning low temperature of 28 degrees. These are obviously the very, very ends of the spectrum. Are we going to hit 96 degrees this month? More than likely not. Are we going to hit 28 degrees as we go into a morning low? More than likely not. I think we're done with the sub-freezing temperatures, but I do believe we are going to settle into a relatively warm month of April, maybe not necessarily hot like 96 degrees would. We definitely would like to hold off until late May, maybe even getting into June before we start to see some mid-90s like that, because it probably comes along with some decent humidity that makes it feel like, say, 106 or 110. The wettest April we've ever seen came back actually only 6 years ago, 2020, where we had almost a foot of rain in the month of April. The snowiest April ever came back in 1964. That was the most recent date that we actually recorded a trace of snow. So I imagine that was probably also a pretty similar environment, where we did have some temperatures in the morning that were right there around freezing temperature, maybe just below it. But nonetheless, obviously, we don't really start to see snow once we get into this time frame in the month of April whatsoever. 74 and 48, these are where your averages are going to start out today. So 74, your average high temperature this afternoon. 48 was your average low temperature this morning. Those numbers are going to go up into the low 80s and the mid 50s by the time we wrap up the month on the 30th. So we are going to get about an 8-degree increase for your average high temperature, and we are going to see a 7-degree increase for your average low temperature. So on average, we typically don't see really anything in the way of snow here in the month of April. There's no real surprise to that. And obviously, once we get into May, June, July, we aren't going to be talking about anything in the way of recorded snow ever here in central Georgia. But average precipitation, around 3.5 inches of rainfall. That's going to be definitely a good deal below what we did see in the month of March. Obviously, you know the saying, April showers bring May flowers. That's not necessarily the case. In fact, April is one of our drier months that we do see in the calendar year, which I'll refer to in just one second. But I did want to hint at the fact that we are going to gain about another hour of daylight over the course of this month. 7:22 a.m. will be when the sunrise was today. And then, or I guess that's not the correct form of grammar right there. 7:22 was when the sun rose today. And then 6:48 a.m. That's when the sun will rise on the last day of the month. 7:54 p.m., almost an 8 p.m. sunset. But by the time we go into the end of the month, the sun's going to set 8:15. So we are going to continue to keep that evening daylight in the forecast, something that definitely puts you in a pretty good mood. So I did want to rank the months by rainfall, and this is going to be data that I've taken since back in the late 1800s. So the average rainfall that we have seen since we started taking records around 100 to 150 years ago here in the central Georgia area. The driest month of the year is going to be October, and there's no surprise there. Obviously, in recent years, we've actually seen that happen. We actually almost had an entire October without recording rainfall whatsoever. As of a year and a half ago. That was after Hurricane Helene. We didn't have any rain chances whatsoever, but you will spot April here, kind of smack dab in the middle. But April is going to be the 5th driest month that we do see in the calendar year. You can see some of our wetter months down here. Of course, July being the wettest, March actually up there for one of the wettest, but that was not the case so far in 2026. Even December is one of the wetter months that we do see throughout the year. So obviously, this is just something that maybe seems a little bit different than your interpretation. You may think the spring and the summertime months are going to typically be on the wetter side, but that's not always the case. In fact, spring month April and spring and getting into borderline summertime month May are both on the drier side of ranked rainfall throughout the calendar year. So hour by hour temperatures. Now let's get into your forecast for the rest of today. Talk about those rain chances as we head into the weekend. Upper 70s turn into low and mid 80s as we go into the afternoon. But notice how we hit our high temperature around 3 and 4 o'clock, and then the numbers steadily decline. I believe that's going to be attributed to this model run, which is the graph model, picking up on some cloud cover, maybe even a shower that just knocks the numbers down a slight bit, and it will halt our warming trend a little bit earlier than, say, 4 into 5 into 6 o'clock that we would see with sunshine in the skies for the rest of the afternoon. So it kind of feels like summer, but overall what you should expect for today is basically a carbon copy forecast of your Tuesday. Maybe some slightly warmer temperatures just because we had some peaks of sunshine a little bit earlier in the day as opposed to yesterday where we still had some overcast skies in the forecast for the morning. But also, once again, a pop-up shower and maybe even a low-end thunderstorm chance. That's going to be in a few isolated spots. But I do have a little bit more confidence in the rain chances popping up today to be a little bit better than what we did see yesterday. So a slightly better likelihood that you could catch a shower or maybe even a thunderstorm into this afternoon as compared to what we saw yesterday. So here's a look at what FutureView has to say. Those green bubbles starting to fire up sometime around 3 to 4 to 5 p.m. It was a little bit earlier as of the last model run, so I wouldn't be surprised to maybe see some rain as early as around 2 p.m. just over the next couple of hours later this afternoon. Not seeing really any indications of those yellows, maybe some oranges popping up like we do see out over to the west. But nonetheless, I do think that the coverage of rain is going to be a bit more widespread over central Georgia today as opposed to yesterday. And then that rain is very quick to fizzle out as we head into the nighttime hours and eventually transition into a clear start to your Thursday morning. But Thursday is going to be a bit different than what we do see over the course of Wednesday and Friday. It's not going to produce widespread rainfall really whatsoever. We were seeing this trend as of yesterday on FutureView, and it looks like it's still coming to fruition and doubling down on this idea that tomorrow is going to be more so a mostly sunny to a partly cloudy afternoon with a steady breeze coming out of the southeast. But only about a 10% chance of a sprinkle or a light shower is all I'm giving for your rain chances as we go into your Thursday afternoon and evening. Treat Thursday as a bit of a break from those daily rain chances, and anything you have in the way of some evening plans are looking good to go. Can't necessarily say the same thing about Friday because number one, what we're noticing is actually a gloomier start to the day. We could see some peaks of sunshine through the cloud cover, but it does appear that the cloud cover builds in a lot more densely as we go later into the morning on Friday. And some spotty showers, they're already firing up as early as 9 a.m. in the forecast. Well, as we continue to go into the afternoon, we'll see some of this cloud cover clear. We'll see some peaks of sunshine that will continue our warming trend. And then we go into the afternoon, just right after lunchtime. This is very reminiscent of what we do see on a summertime forecast. Immediately after lunchtime, those temperatures are warm enough, there's enough humidity in the forecast, and spotty showers begin to bubble up. However, as we continue throughout the afternoon and into the evening hours, this rain isn't the quickest to fizzle out, and it looks like we have a greater chance of seeing maybe a rumble, or maybe hearing a rumble of thunder, rather I should say, but seeing some of those pockets of some orange and some red, which are indicating those heavier rainfall rates that can be associated with a few pockets of some thunderstorms. That will continue into the evening hours, and what we are seeing, according to Future View, is not only all of this activity bubbling up all over central Georgia, but even some of those bubbles clustering and clumping together to have some more widespread impacts. So I would anticipate the rain to be a bit more widespread if you have any plans, say, for dinner on Friday evening, or maybe going to a Good Friday service at church on Friday evening. The moral of the story is I would definitely plan on having the rain gear ready to go throughout Friday plans that you do have after you finish out the school week, after you finish out the work week. And as we head into the beginning of the weekend, still holding on to a little bit of residual rain, but it clears eventually as we go overnight Friday into early on Saturday, which is where Future View will end. So once again, I want to emphasize the isolated nature of these rain chances, especially today. Only a select few spots going to get lucky and catch that rain. But I do think that the coverage of rain is a little bit better throughout your Friday. That's why I've given your rain chances on Friday afternoon and evening a bit of an uptick. But there are still areas like Dublin here, like Eastman, like Wrightsville. This is just on this model run that we are seeing that don't have anything in the way of rainfall whatsoever. So not everyone will see rain over the next 3 days. Want to continue to hammer that point in, which is why I continue to say proceed with caution. Just have the rain gear ready to go in case you need it, because there is still a likelihood that you don't need it whatsoever. But some isolated pockets who do catch a couple of those, say, thunderstorms, they could have some fairly impressive rainfall totals like what we saw over in Taylor County yesterday, about an inch or maybe even 2 inches of rain in a select few spots. That will not be very widespread, but it does look like some totals like Macon up here at 0.9 inches, 1.1 inches of rain down there in Macon County and Montezuma. That is what we can see from some of those thunderstorms hanging around the same areas that are continuing to dump those heavy rainfall rates over the same area. So for some better rain accumulation, which is just what the drought doctor did order. Next 3 days, high temperatures and morning lows still not really of concern. They're not going to really change. Upper 50s, low 60s. That's how we'll start out each of the next couple of mornings, and then low to mid 50s for high temperatures each and every day. I do have a better chance of rain today as opposed to what you do see tomorrow on Future View, and I wouldn't be surprised to hear a rumble of thunder or two later this afternoon, but I do think the chances of seeing rain and hearing that rumble of thunder will be the best throughout your Friday afternoon and evening. And if we continue to see the model runs do that same thing on Friday afternoon and evening, we might even give those rain chances a bit of an uptick, maybe into about a 50% or even possibly as high as a 60% chance of rain. But we do have another day on your 7-day forecast that is going to have the most organization behind its rain chances as well, which you'll see in just a moment. Here's a look at your winds and wind gusts over the next couple of days. Really just a light breeze on occasion throughout the rest of today. If you do catch something in the way of a thunderstorm, the wind gusts are going to pick up in those isolated spots, maybe up to about 20 to 30 miles per hour, but not really looking at widespread, very gusty winds whatsoever. You can see a light breeze builds in across all of central Georgia tomorrow, and a sea breeze actually brings some gusts up to 20 to maybe 25 miles per hour throughout the nighttime hours going Thursday into Friday. Then Friday, once again, pretty widespread light breeze coming out of the south and the southeast. And that's where we're also going to notice some isolated gusts that get up to maybe 30 to 40 miles per hour, maybe even higher if that thunderstorm is going to be stronger, even possibly severe in nature. But don't really have any confidence in any of these thunderstorms maintaining severe criteria per se. I don't think it's quite that hot. I don't think it's quite that humid, but of course it's something that we will continue to keep a close eye on each and every afternoon as the radar does get quite full and kind of pop up like popcorn. It is going to be a sight to behold, obviously something that we do see very frequently in the summertime, but when it starts to happen pretty early in the year, well before summertime, it is a bit of a sight to behold. I wouldn't doubt that we'll still have our fair share of some pop-up shower and maybe even some storm chances as we go into your Saturday afternoon and evening. Rain chances not looking as impressive as what we do see on your, well, I guess that just decided to not pause. So we will go to the backup plan, which is the handy dandy computer, which I always keep as a fail-safe when something like that happens. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and flash back to your Saturday afternoon and evening, where it does look like most of the coverage of the rain is to the north of us. But here comes that frontal boundary that we have been tracking for quite some time as we go into your Easter Sunday. So let's pause it at 8 to 9 a.m. It does look like the GFS is leading ahead of the European here in blue. That widespread rain could be right on our doorstep as we go into the morning hours on Sunday. Now, this would obviously have more implications for the morning church service and, of course, maybe any early lunchtime plans that you have after that church service with friends and family. As we go into the middle of the afternoon, really early afternoon, I would rather say, the GFS is still showing that widespread rain. The European is showing it a little bit behind, but both frontal boundaries are really fizzling out and losing their steam as we go later into the day on Sunday. In fact, the rain finally just looks to be on our doorstep here Sunday at 9 p.m. if we go the European route, hence why we still need to do a little bit of fine-tuning to at least give you the specific timing of when these rain chances are going to pop up. But that's the last pause point that I really want to show you, because once we get past that, say goodbye to your rain chances. There will still be some down to the south of us, but we are going to clear out. And we are going to welcome in some more seasonable numbers, get the high temperatures back, say, somewhere into maybe around the lower 70s, maybe even the mid 70s for an extended stretch into the end of next week. In terms of how much rainfall could we see over the course of this next week, still looking like the same range that these models were showing yesterday, anywhere from about 1/4 of an inch to about a 1/2 inch of rainfall. I would anticipate maybe a little bit more than this, but it all depends on how well that frontal boundary really does hold together. Here's a look at your humidity day by day. Slight downtick tomorrow, hence why we get a downtick in the rain chances. Going into Friday, another uptick before we go into Saturday and Sunday. And there's not as much moisture to work with over the back half of this weekend as what we have on Friday, as what we do have in the forecast for today. So that's a promising sign to see. Hopefully that's what we continue to see to eliminate those rain chances as we go into your Easter Sunday. But then Monday and Tuesday, we definitely see that humidity try to begin to drop off a cliff. And eventually the temperatures will follow, but it's not going to be a very, very substantial cool down. We can see that the afternoon high temperature on Sunday is going to be a little bit lower than those low and mid 80s we have been used to. Morning lows are not changing until we finally get into the beginning of next week. And then a couple mornings are going to bring back that chill. So here's where your early Easter forecast does stand. As of the 3 p.m. hour where I took these pause points, it does look like the rain is still off to our west and our northwest according to the Euro, but it's more so a broken line of showers moving through according to the GFS. Keep the rain jacket handy for any plans you have later in the day on Easter Sunday, but the earlier the better still remains my best piece of advice I can give you for some outdoor plans. Highs going to be in the upper 70s. Morning lows are going to be somewhere in the low 60s. But then I mentioned as we go into the beginning of next week, kind of zooming through this because I want to get to the Artemis stuff here just for a second, 50 and 45 for morning lows. Afternoon highs that get down into the low 70s as we kick off the beginning of next week. And we'll get those daily rain chances out of the forecast like we are continuing to see for the rest of the work week today. So here's where things stand for the Artemis 2 launch. As of around 11 a.m., we're about 7 hours until launch time. And the weather is looking about 80% favorable. So it's going to depend on a bunch of different things, and that's why we could see the postponement of this launch. Temperatures, wind, lightning, clouds, solar activity. So let's take a look at future view where it does show actually some showers moving inland from off the space coast of Florida, maybe even a thunderstorm throughout the afternoon time frame. That's what you see here at 1 p.m. So the main concerns in the way of rain and maybe some cloud cover, that's moving farther inland as we go throughout the early afternoon hours. Then closer to launch time, I think the only thing that's going to really need to be monitored are going to be some of these wind gusts where we could see them up to maybe about 20 miles per hour. Temperatures should begin cooling down from, I imagine, some high temperatures in the mid 80s to even the upper 80s down there on the space coast of Florida. So it remains to be seen, but we are streaming it live here on 13 WMAZ+. So be sure to tune in closer to around the 6 p.m. hour, and I imagine CBS will take a live coverage of it if we are going to see that launch. All things a go, but there is going to be a press conference to provide us with an update as we get closer and closer to that time frame. And I believe we are going to get that press conference on 13 WMAZ+, closer to around the 1 p.m. hour. So it will be truly a sight to behold, but obviously a lot to unpack with your Wednesday in the extended forecast. If we missed something, we'll cover it in more detail coming around tomorrow, but I'm running out of time for it today. So we'll see you back here once again tomorrow at 11 a.m.